All right, everyone. Hello. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another special edition of Pox Populi and Friends. Today, I have assembled an all-star cast of Irishmen and women, and we are going to be talking about the groundswell of Irish nationalism that has kicked off in the country and the ripple effects that it is having and could potentially have in the rest of Europe. And we'll also be talking about many more topics and, of course, addressing your questions and comments. So, if you would like to send a question or if you have a particularly important comment that you would like me or any of my guests tonight to address, you can send those questions or comments to the Pox Populi super chat link over on Entropy. This link is in the Telegram post promoting this stream. So if you find me on Telegram at Pox Populi, you'll find all the links there. You'll also find links to the various platforms or accounts of the guests that I have on tonight, who I will be introducing shortly. So I think with all of that out of the way, let me just check on Odyssey, make sure everything is going okay there. Odyssey, can you hear me? We have Dino Legovic is there. He says it's 3:53 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. Good morning, all. Well, good morning to you, Dino Legovic. Good to have you with us. Okay, so I think everything is okay there on Odyssey. And we're also streaming on YouTube. So hello, YouTube. Good to have you with us all. And let me just check here to make sure that the connection is still okay. Yeah, okay, looks like we're good. All right, so my guests tonight, I will just introduce them one at a time. So first we have Patricia. Hello, Patricia. How are you? Thanks for being on the stream.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pox, for inviting me on the chat tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to having your insights. We were just chatting a bit before we went live, and you were saying that you've been involved in activism in Ireland for quite some time. So would you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself?
I will, of course, Pox. Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah. My name is Patricia. I'm an admin on Gavin's channel, Off Grid Ireland, and we do several podcasts during the week. I'm based myself over in the west of Ireland in County Mayo. I'm actually in the process of going off grid. I'm a farmer. And I have horses, and I have goats, and I have some sheep, and I have a few cows on my brother's other farm. So I'm hopefully by the end of this year, I hope to be off grid totally. Fingers crossed with everything that's going on. Yeah, Pox. I'm afraid I'm a bit of an old hen. I've been on the go for a while. No, I would be very active. I would be very active. In different things that's going on in the locality, and that there's a few things that arose in my own community a few years ago, and I spoke out against it. But also, too, back in the early 2000s, there was an issue over in Mayo, over in the seaside village, where Shell decided that they wanted to bring in gas. They wanted to harvest natural gas off the Mayo coast. And there was quite a lot of pushback from the local community of Rossport, and it actually made headline news all over the world. So I was involved in that in the background. I was only a background. I went a few times and spoke out a few times, but so I really from then onwards, I became, aware of my own, my own community, my own environment. And I also saw, how government officials treated the ordinary citizen in the country, how they portrayed the citizens as, as criminals, as, they were always portrayed in a poor light. So, as we've moved on now to the in recent times. I don't want to dox your dox the stream, but in recent times, as you all on the stream and the guests would know, that there has been severe pushback from our government here in Ireland, and we're all quite concerned at the way and the direction our country is going.
Certainly, yeah. Very concerning, some of the developments that are going on in Ireland. There's positive developments coming from the people, and some very concerning developments coming from the state, which I'm sure we will discuss. Although I do want to focus on the positives tonight. I want this to be a re-moralizing conversation, a re-moralizing stream. I use that term to
Absolutely.
contrast with demoralizing. But we also have to be realistic and talk about the real struggles that we're going through. And I'll have to bring you on some other time in the future to discuss the farming, because that's something that I just find fantastic, and I'd love to talk more about that and hear more about your experience with that. Okay, so now let me bring on my next guest, which is someone who I have the pleasure of calling a friend, FREN, an internet friend. We've chatted a few times, more than a few times, really. So with no further ado, let me introduce the German Pointer. How are you?
Hello, Pox. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, thanks for being able to make it. I think my audience will be more or less familiar with you due to the fact that we've had quite a few conversations together over the past year and a half or so. Actually, I think it's been a little bit over a year. I think we had perhaps the second or third conversation together right about this time a year ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine and kicked off all of that hullabaloo. So, but there could be some new listeners as well, and people who might not be familiar with you and your work. So go ahead and just introduce yourself as well.
All right. So I have a channel on Odyssey. You'll find it under the German Pointer. I also have one on BitChute. I was kicked off YouTube, I don't know, last summer. And I got into this. I wasn't really planning it. I was listening to, there were very few actual dissident voices, 5 years ago or so, very few. And I wasn't very happy with, the mass migration from the third world. I could see a lot of dangers in it. And I decided to make very short videos. And, sometimes I've been prolific and other times I've disappeared for a while. But perhaps in the last 2 years, I've been consistent enough. At least once a week or once every 2 weeks, I'll put out a video.
Yeah, and I have to say, I try and catch your videos as often as possible. I really like them because they're in the vein of stories, telling stories. One I listened to not too long ago was about a bit of a run-in you had with someone at a pub. You titled that video, I think, "Answer the effing question," and you don't. Looking at the titles and at the beginning of the story, you might think, oh, it's just a little personal anecdote, but then oftentimes there's something much deeper that you end the story with. So I always enjoy your videos there. Okay, so now let's bring on our next guest. He is the last true Gale, and this is the first time that I've had the pleasure of speaking with him. Actually, no, I think you joined one of my Telegram streams a few months ago. But we've interacted a couple of times on Telegram, but this will be like the first major occasion where we've got to speak together. So welcome to the stream, Last True Gale.
Oh, yeah. How are things? Delighted to be on, and thank you for inviting me on.
Okay, yeah, sure. And would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So on my end, I've been around for a few years now at this stage. I started up the channel in January of 2020. And I was talking about the election then, and kind of how all the different parties would do and not do. And then, the lockdowns and all that kind of stuff happened, and the channel turned into a sort of a, I don't know, numbers-based channel for a bit. Then after that, I started talking with I just have to be careful because we're on YouTube. The certain medication gets brought back in, or gets brought in. And then the things shifted out into 2022. So I started in 2022 talking more about, or just kind of like how things work, or how I think things work in Ireland. You know, the whole complex of media, politicians, academia, civil servants, all of this kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, like, I haven't really done that much, or I haven't been active that much over the past few months. But then, like, and it kind of rolls back into into what's going on right now, because I think one of the mad things, or the crazy things right now, is that, like, and you were talking about, like, making this kind of more positively framed. I mean, things are changing and growing so fast. It's kind of almost hard to have an opinion on it, because once something happens, another thing happens. I mean, I literally just found out before the stream started, like, there's a couple of other protests that I never even heard of that are going to kick off over the next couple of days. I mean, it really is incredible like that. But that's me basically, I'd say.
Yeah, your Telegram channel has got some really good insights. You don't post, like you said, you've been, active, off and on a bit for the past few months. But when you do get onto your Telegram, it's always worthwhile to read. So everyone check out Last True Gale on Telegram. And yeah, when I was putting together this stream, and I was thinking about who I could invite on, you were definitely one of the names that came up. And then as we were looking for a date, I was a bit worried. I was thinking, well, if we leave it to the end of February, maybe things will have, died down by then, and it won't be a current thing anymore. But it looks like things are actually escalating. So yeah, there's always more twists and turns in this tale, and hopefully we'll have a happy ending, and this groundswell of nationalism will continue. Let me bring on our next guest. He's someone who I spoke with not too long ago on Countercurrents Radio. So please welcome Gerald Murphy. How are you?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Pox. Thanks for having me on, and I'm good.
All right.
Yeah, we had a good chat last time. I talk too much, so I'll try to restrain myself this evening. And we have other guests as well, so that's kind of handy. But yeah, appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no worries. It's fine. If everyone's got things to say, I prefer guests who speak freely rather than guests who it's like pulling teeth trying to get them to say something or have some banter. And we are on YouTube. Last True Gale mentioned that moments ago. We are streaming on YouTube, but I invite you all to speak as freely as you want. I don't care if this channel on YouTube gets taken down. I really don't. So speak as freely as you want. That said, we also must be aware that the eye of Sauron is always on us in one way or another. So for your own personal protection, guard what you want to say as you will. But as far as expressing your opinions, you're free to do so on my channel. Don't worry. Okay, so I think that's everyone. So let's just start at the start then. I wanted to retrace the footprints in the winter snow and go back to where and why and how this all started in Ireland. And I think it's so fitting that there is this taking place in Ireland. And I think it's important to give credit and to remember, to give mention to other places that have successfully even protested against similar things. Asylum centers, quote unquote asylum centers, quote unquote migrant centers, or hotels being used to house, these unvetted men from all over the world. We have the example of Lenton on Ouse in England a few months ago. That community protested against a potential migrant center. that was going to be constructed in their very small village. And they were successful. That plan has been scrapped, as far as I know. But then something else happened. Something happened in Ireland that seems to have gone to a next level. And I find it fitting because I personally always felt that when, demographic replacement migration came to Ireland, it was going to be very painful to watch. I'm half Irish. I've spoken before about the connection I have to my Irish side. It means a lot to me. And I knew this wasn't going to leave Ireland unscathed. But I also always had hope that Ireland would have a very good resistance to it because of who the Irish people are, because of their history, because you can't guilt trip the Irish like you can, colonial powers like the French or the English, or, the supposed villains of the 1930s in Germany. Ireland has a pretty good immune system. So who would like to jump in and tell us, give us a bit of the backstory of how this all started and how we got here?
Don't jump in all at once, guys.
Sorry, Gerald. I'll just jump in, but I'm going to just jump back to another time period, 2008. I'm based over, as I said, over in the west of Ireland, and during the Syrian war conflict that was taking place over there, our local town got quite a significant amount of Syrian refugees, and they were put in a local hotel that had closed down. It was actually a brand new hotel that only opened, I would say, for about a year, and due to financial constraints, they were no longer viable and they closed. And then within 6 months, all of a sudden, there was up on 80 to 100 migrants from the Syrian war conflict brought into our locality. Now, initially, it was, the media, was kind of any downplay of, anybody wondering what was going on. It was downplayed. Oh, these poor people, they're escaping the war. We have to help them. So the local townspeople got behind it. Do you know what I mean? And welcomed these people. But that was grand for a while. But then more and more people started coming, and the initial people were moved out of the hotel after 3 months, after 4 months, whatever it was, and they just seemed to disappear into thin air. But basically what was happening was they were moved into social housing around the locality and in nearby towns, and then another influx of migrants was brought into the hotel and basically settled for a few months and then moved on. But a lot of people kind of were noticing that that the police car was outside the hotels, and when you'd inquire what was going on, you were met with stone silence. Nothing to see here, move along. And you'd hear rumblings from other ethnic backgrounds that are living in the town, that are that have accepted our culture and work, and saying that there was issues going on with them, that they were infighting and stuff like that. And I just happened to be talking to somebody that actually worked in the hotel, and they stated to me that that they're killing one another. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? They're killing one another. And she just basically said that, look, she goes, there's people from different areas of the country, and they're from different backgrounds, and they're all put in the one area, and they've nothing really to do. Yes, there was activities laid on for them, but they're locked in a hotel basically. And as a human, you like to go and do what you want. Do you know what I mean? You're not a caged animal, and that's what they kind of felt like. And there was in-house fighting and arguing, and then they started arguing over the food, and they had to fly in a specialist chef to cook their food the way they wanted it. And they tried to appease, everything, they bowed down to everything that they wanted, and they helped them out, and they integrated. Well, they once they were integrated for 3-4 months, then they were moved out into different communities and that. But even in our local town, you every week there was more faces. The town was more busy, and it wasn't, it was faces that weren't local to the area. Do you know what I mean? And walking around in gangs and that, and gangs of young men, and just kind of unnerved people. But we never, people just got on with things. They didn't really bother. But they did run and check there about a year or two ago, and is up on 80 different nationalities in my local town now. So like all of these people are coming to my town, and
Jesus.
yeah, but you have people that don't have skin in the game. Do you know what I mean? Like you have people from that aren't fleeing war-torn areas. Now I'll explain later. There's quite some shocking incidents that are going on now, but I'm just talking initially about 2008. That we've been experiencing it over in the west of Ireland before the rest of Ireland really has started to, now with this gang that's coming, these different gangs that are coming in now. People are seeing it now in other parts of the country. We've been dealing with it really since 2008. Not on the malicious terms that are coming in now, but we've been dealing with it really. So I'm yapping now here a bit, so I'm going to back off and let one of the lads talk in.
Sure. So, yeah, I think, sometimes it is necessary to go back even further. And, in the case of Ireland, I would say the history of the type of immigration that we are dealing with in European nations might not have been at the scale that it's been in, in a country like France or the Mediterranean countries that are sort of like the gateway, the port, literally the port of Europe. But it has been going on in Ireland for some time too, and it is worth remembering that this didn't just start, a couple of years ago, or even 5 years ago. It seems to have picked up pace, certainly, but it's the slow boiling of the frog. It's been going on for a while. It's been going on drip by drip. But I think, talking about the positives, it might be that our adversaries have overplayed their hand now, and they've gone too far too fast. And the frog in the boiling water realizes the predicament that he's in. Gerald, would you like to join in and add your insights, your summation of how we got here? How did this all happen? So Patricia's in the west of Ireland, but you're closer to the action of the past few months, right?
Yeah, more or less, yeah. Let's just say. Yeah, I heard you talking about frogs and pots. I was thinking that's no way to talk about the French. Come on, we're meant to be getting on here. Yeah, how did it get to all this? I am closer to the action, you could say, but I've been all over the country over the last few years. I think it was in 2018. We talked about this a few nights ago, but I'll repeat. I've been following these asylum injections. Let's say these people. I did a big video called "The Asylum Industry" years ago, documenting how, and I won't get too far into it, but how these hundreds of male migrants, for the most part, were being dumped on these small towns. Basically overnight, and their democratic will was being completely not just overran, but kind of subtly manipulated by all these. So yeah, I've been kind of studying that, and that was my thing for years. But what's recently happened is it's kind of escalated to new levels. They're doing more of it, and there is the thing we're talking about now is that there's a response to it. There's a mass movement against it. I think it was 2019. I forget which year, but at one point in the west of Ireland, in County Galway, a town called AtlasAiArt, of the many towns that I studied, paid attention to, did activism and journalism in, most of them lost, so to speak. They were unsuccessful. They would vote 98% against it in a town hall meeting and then just get ignored and get called racist, and then all flee to the hills and not talk about it anymore and start bickering amongst themselves, and the usual psyops kind of worked. But in this town called Uachtarard, which is called the Gateway to Connemara, a beautiful part of Western Ireland, they, for whatever reason, they just had a strong enough social fabric, and the right people took the helm of it to lead it from within the community and sort of educated themselves rapidly, crash course. And through just community cohesion, they opposed it successfully. They camped outside of it 24/7. They had food vans. It was like a mini music festival. And they had tractors coming down with things full of rubble, placing it on the gateway to the site where they were trying to do up this old hotel. And they successfully stopped it. Eventually, one of the businessmen who owned the hotel or whatever, leasing it out to the government for these asylum spoofers, he backed out under the kind of pressure. And that was a rare win. And not even whether it was a win or not, like whether the centre was closed down or not. It was a win in the fact that the town came out vociferously against it, united. And what's happening now is that is occurring everywhere in dozens of places around the country. They're not all stopping the centres. Few of them are at all. Some of them are. But it's the fact that this opposition is happening by the dozen constantly. As I think last True Gale said, it's happening so fast, it's hard to keep up with it all, the way events are going. So, so I've been paying attention to that, and I'm kind of, that's basically my whole shtick. I find it interesting. It's as a part of the broader international, or it's kind of broader, it sounds like a paradox here to say, the international nationalist point of view, from various different countries. A general, and I'll cede the floor here now, but as a general thing beyond just Ireland, this has been happening since, you could say World War II, when they brought the Turks into Germany for the labor shortage, all this kind of stuff. And what were you at the Boston busing that was going on in the 80s and 90s? If you look up videos of that, in that case, they were white Americans, right? It was this kind of forcing of ethnic communities to be together. It wasn't so much that people were demanding exclusivity. They were demanding not to have industrial transfers done on behalf of the state. That's what was going on, right, in Boston. And you can see even the people who were there, again, they were Irish ethnically and culturally, and they're pretty tough cookies, these Boston Irish in the 80s. And you can still see them saying they're reluctant on camera to talk. You can see the same phenomenon of these, you could call them local people or whatever, being sort of caught in deer in the headlights of this kind of phenomenon that is, my belief, is completely orchestrated across the West. It is part of a long-standing program. In Lithuania, a couple of years ago, they moved migrants who had been shipped in from Belarus as a warfare campaign. Those migrants, because they're in Lithuania, and Lithuania's in the EU system, they have to obey all these stupid laws that make no sense. They have to actually keep them instead of just deporting them. They put them in rural facilities and all of this. And of course, people protested just like they have done and are doing in Ireland. And Lithuanian police tear gassed their own people, right? People don't talk about that, but it's happening all over the place. So this is a relevant conversation beyond Ireland. It's just Ireland is I think at the moment, the epicenter, closely followed by some other countries, which is what makes it interesting and relevant.
Sure. Yeah, there's always been these flare-ups, and I've said this before, that I'm not the most vocal supporter or cheerleader of protest movements. In fact, two of the most, I would say, headline-grabbing protest movements of the past year or so, the Canadian trucker blockade and the Dutch farmer protests. I've been pretty critical of them. I wasn't really impressed, or did not have much high hope for those protests. And that's not to say that I don't support their cause. And in particular, when it comes to the Dutch farmers, I really support their cause. I like people who produce food for us to eat. What can I say? But there have been these flare-ups, and when we look even at the political scene, we've seen what look to be victories in countries like Italy, for example. Twice now in the space of 5 years, we've seen, at least on the political stage, significant nationalist sentiment rising to the fore and being converted into political success. 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, I suppose, it was the sweeping into power of Lega and Matteo Salvini, promising to stop invasione, right? Stopping the invasion, stopping these foreign NGO boats. They're flying foreign flags. They have no right to, dump their human cargo on Italian soil. But we know that didn't really turn out as well as people had hoped. Italian politics is famously full of corruption and all sorts of chicanery, and things never really go as you expect. And it kind of fizzled out. Salvini himself was ousted from politics in a major scandal. But then, fast forward to 2022, we have Fratelli d'Italia and the nationalists of Giorgia Meloni's party getting these massive wins, and she's the most popular leader in the European Union. Why? Because her party and she have promised to stop the invasion, stop this mass immigration that's been going on for some time. The reason I feel hopeful about Ireland is that this is a populist movement, and we have to remember, sometimes we get very frustrated with the normie, but we have to remember that we are a populist movement. This is a populist cause, and it is important to get the people on our side. And so I see that there's this populist wellspring of nationalist sentiment in Ireland. They have objectives. We want to close down this migrant center. We want these hotels to stop housing, strange foreign men from God knows where who have come under the guise of refugees, when we all know that they're not genuine refugees. So yeah, there's been flare-ups all across the continent. It seems like right now the biggest flare-up is in Ireland, and I think that's why it's attracted a lot of attention. Last true Gale, I would like to hear your thoughts on this, and also what do you think about the state's reaction to it? Because I see a lot of times you analyze the state behavior, the government behavior, the hypocrisy of certain members of parliament. So what are your thoughts on everything that's happened since November, and in particular, the reaction from the Irish government?
Yeah, so I think I remember listening just back towards when you and Gerald there were talking a couple of weeks ago, and you were talking about why this has happened in Ireland compared to other places. And I think, and this will lead back into what you were saying at the end. So one of the reasons is that I think Ireland, because of what happened in 2008 and what followed onto that, if you take a look at the immigration numbers, 300,000 people left the country, and 140,000 of them or so, and disproportionately young people, they never came back. And between events like that, there's been this kind of level of kind of anger and frustration that's been kind of building up more and more and more. And obviously, there's a clear and present issue of if you're in a community and these strange people are just moved into a building, I mean, that's it as well. But I think another part of feeding into that is the fact that this kind of anger with a lot of just Irish people about how things have just deteriorated, and the country has essentially become more totalitarian, especially since Fine Gael got in 2011. That's been kind of building up. And when you were kind of talking there about the state reaction, I think the interesting thing there is, if you take a look, say just on a map of where these people are being put and what areas they're being put in, they're not being put in upper class areas in Dublin like Killiney or Dalkey, and they're not even being put in kind of middle class areas. They're being put in working class areas and rural areas, but also they're being put in predominantly or areas which have a disproportionate amount of Sinn Féin voters. And I think one of the things that really did kick this off was in East Wall, on the second night of the protests, someone got a bit of footage. And just for context, East Wall is in a constituency in Ireland called Dublin Central. And Dublin Central is where Mary Lou MacDonald is based. And for anyone who's not familiar, Lou MacDonald is the head of the party Sinn Féin, who are they're a globalist kind of mess of a party, but they've got, up until recently, which is very interesting as well, they've kind of acted as sort of like fake opposition or fake kind of nationalists. And what I think the government have tried to do, in a sense, is the Fianna Fáil Fine Gael government is that they've tried to put these centres in these areas to make the locals angry at the Sinn Féin councillors and damage their vote, in a sense. But what happened is that bit of footage that was kind of going around, it basically had a big crowd of people booing Sinn Féin and booing her in her own constituency, which she's expected to top and which she's expected to just kind of run rampant home on. And with this anger, the next day you had all these kind of parties, all your people before profits, all your Sinn Féins going like crazy on this, saying like, it's evil far right people. It's, you shouldn't join in their protests, all of that kind of thing. And it's very, I think that's very kind of, that's an important issue, because one thing they're scared of is if these people, for example, if this issue ended up in a upper middle class area of Dublin, what would happen is that the locals would get together, they'd hire the best solicitor in the country, it would be brought to the High Court, and the thing would be shut down. I mean, that's literally the reason you don't see these direct provision centres, for example, in a place like Ballsbridge, because they tried it, and Ballsbridge is a very nice area. Dublin, for example, is that's literally what happened, and the direct provision centre was shut down, and because the people there had the resources, and that was it. So that's where I think that's where that freak out was kind of coming from, or is continuing to come from, because of the fact that like they thought that like the Sinn Féin thing was kind of maybe a bit more wrapped up or expected, but even over the past few months, if you take a look at the polls, Sinn Féin have been stagnating to declining. And I think as well, you were talking about like kind of what was going on in Italy. I think what's happened in terms of a trend, in terms of a lot of European countries, is that once you get past a certain point, you get the kind of, I don't know, how would you phrase them, kind of right of center parties.
Controlled opposition.
Yeah, exactly. And whatever else comes out of these protests, I think I can say one thing fairly with confidence, is that there's going to be much more of a focus of that controlled opposition, and what some of the parties, Fine Gael and Varadkar, are doing to a certain extent. They're making comments on this kind of dog whistling stuff. So I think that part, anyway, if nothing else, even if this goes away tomorrow, that part is not going away anytime soon. And I think that's one of the major changes that's going to result from this going forward, because there is no, like I don't know what it's like maybe as much, say, like in Spain, but like over here, there's just RTE, there's just the Irish Times, and a few papers like that. There isn't a GB News even. There isn't a Peter Hitchens even. There isn't a Douglas Murray. There's literally nothing like that here. And I think one of the reasons why it even kicked off here is because there is no outlet like that. There is no Peter Hitchens or, whatever that might be. And I think that definitely left to what's happened right now. So,
hold that thought as well. There's a question in the comments that I saw some time ago. And again, we have quite a few people listening. We've got almost 60 on YouTube, over 50 on Odyssey. So if you do want to send in questions that you'd like to hear an answer to, that is what the super chats on Entropy are for, because I'm not going to be able to catch all of them. But someone did ask about any sort of nationalist parties in Ireland. So I think at some point we will have to talk about the National Party, for example, I'm sure we can have much to say about that. So if you do have something that you really want an answer to, do send a super chat, entropystream.live/Pox Populi. All right. German Pointer, you, like myself, are kind of at a distance from what's going on in Ireland. What is your bird's eye view of the situation?
Yeah, you mentioned, going back to the past. And if you think about the mafia, if you think about the Don, he'll do a favor for you, yeah? But he expects something in return. And usually what he expects in return is much bigger than the favor he's given you. And in the case of Ireland, when we entered the EU, compared to other European countries, we were remarkably poor compared to Germany, compared to France. And we got a lot of EU money to build roads. We got a lot of grants. A lot of Irish farmers have received millions and millions of euros for doing sweet FA. And now the EU is asking for a favor. And these big companies from America, these multinationals, they all arrived in Ireland. And the standard was quite low. Ireland has well, I don't know at the moment, but it has had a very low corporation tax rate. And that has enticed many massive American companies to set up their headquarters in Ireland. And the politicians have always said it's good for jobs, it's great for jobs, it's all about jobs, without thinking that maybe these massive corporations could slice up the country, could change the demographics for their own needs. Likewise, the European Union, it can decide tonight that a certain town in Ireland needs to take in, for example, 300 Somalians. And I actually saw that earlier today. I was on Twitter. I'm never on it for long. I'm on it for maybe 3 or 4 minutes at a time. I scroll down into my feed and then I might not check for another 5 or 6 hours. But before I headed out this afternoon, I saw that some school in County Meath was taking in 300 Somalians. So you can presume these would be 300 military-aged men. And the idea that they're taking them into a school, a school, it just doesn't sit right. It just doesn't sit right with the brain. The idea that military-aged men, we don't know who they are. No one knows who they are, but they could be arriving tonight, tomorrow, next week, next month into a village, and they'll be put up in a school. So I don't know what.
And this isn't even during the summer. This is while school is in session.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it. So yeah, that's part of it. People are, the powers that be, they've supposedly given us so much, and now they expect a favor in return, and that favor is the genocide of the Irish as an ethnic group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the signs that I saw in the East Wall protests, I just loved it. I loved that someone had made this picket sign, because it summed it up perfectly. And it just said, mass immigration equals the ethnic cleansing of the Irish people. And I would just want to say, we're going to keep diving into this, but just as briefly as possible, to anyone, who is opposed to someone like myself, someone like my guests, to anyone who is listening, waiting for something to be said to reveal us as evil, hateful people, I just want it to be known that, at least for myself, and I'm sure this goes for my guests as well, that we are not concerned about these issues because we hate the people in front of us. It's because we love the people behind us. We are concerned about the genuine diversity of the European nations and, expanding even more, the world's nations. And in the case of Ireland, there is a deep culture here. There is so much on this small island out in the sea, and there are megalithic structures that are older than the pyramids. There are religious, traditions, old pagan traditions that go back thousands and thousands of years. There are animal bones that have been discovered that go back tens of thousands of years. And to just say that all of that doesn't matter and that you can just swap out the population on the island of Ireland for new people, new Irish people, the new Irish, the new Europeans, as is being said for the rest of the continent. Well, I disagree. I think that it's very, it's not even likely that perhaps even the average Irishman is aware of just how, just the depth and breadth of the culture in Ireland is. So how can you expect a Pakistani or Nigerian who's just been basically deposited onto the land to have any sort of respect or connection to that? And this is true for all nations. This is true for all peoples. And I've seen other comments too saying, even genuine refugees, they should first seek shelter somewhere closer to their own home. I totally agree with that comment. I think many times we are trapped in a framework. We are trapped in a lexicon of terms that don't allow us to speak freely. And I believe in breaking free of that. And I do believe that even if all of the people coming into Ireland or the rest of Europe were coming legally, and they were all saints and they were all angels, or they were all genuinely fleeing from terrible situations, that does not justify the transformation through sheer numbers of these European countries to where they are heading. That is unexcusable. That is not, that is not the same as taking in people who need help on a temporary basis, mind you. It's just not. You cannot have demographic replacement in the name of saving refugees, even if they were genuine. But we know from years now, years and years and years of data analysis and investigation, that these are not always genuine refugees. So that said, I'd like to get now a little bit closer to the ground and get a feeling of what's it like? What is the atmosphere like at these protests? What are the Irish people thinking and feeling and expressing? So I think Gerald and Patricia will probably have the best insights here. I think, Gerald, you've actually attended one of the protests in Dublin, right?
Yeah, I have. I've attended several of them, actually. The only people who've attended more protests are, well, there are a few, but people I can think of would be Philip Dwyer and Derek Bly. They're both live streamers. They go to everything. But I've been to a few. And the atmosphere on the ground is interesting. There are many things you could say about it, I suppose, but the urban protests in particular are very energetic, very vital. They're not afraid. They're not making excuses. They chant things like, get them out. They don't say, oh, it's just the services. See, this is what happens a lot. Some people don't understand this, is that communities under pressure from a pervasive totalitarian system that they basically feel is all around them will make any excuse under the book. They will say it's not about it can get ridiculous. They say, oh no, we love asylum seekers. We love them. We just don't have enough doctors, or this, that, and the other. You talk to them in private, and they basically know everything about like population RE placement. Let's say I'll get around your YouTube algorithm, but yeah, people know what's up, and then in public they're very not craven. I don't know what the word is. They're just very afraid and very grasping. But you don't see that in Dublin. Dublin people just don't give a few CK. And sorry, I have a young kid, so I'm getting used to spelling out curse words. Yeah, it's a recent thing because I have a mouth like a sailor, to be honest. But anyway, so yeah, it's Dublin. Dublin is pretty cool in that sense. But then there's confusion there. People don't understand it. There are people who've emerged as kind of budding leaders of some of these local movements, right? Who are excellent in one sense, that they They get it better than a lot of the rural communities I saw over the years. They're better. But sometimes you can see a bit of backsliding into it because it's sort of like an entropy or something where, you know, they slide into, well, let's just convince everybody, let's convince this scolding media that we're not racist, right? Let's show the media up by saying, hey, look at me here, I'm clearly not racist. And then maybe we'll get better press, or maybe we'll show third parties, the onlooking public, how silly the media are or whatever, right? And it's one of these things that's really it's kind of hard to explain to someone from scratch because there's no good way to find the words for it to say, well, that's actually not a good idea. It seems intuitively like a good thing to do. And yet it is a sort of Pavlovian system, in my view, that the media and the NGOs will apply pressure onto people, give them bad press. And then just hypothetical, a nationalist activist shows up who's been called far right for years in the newspapers, and was getting on great with the people locally, and they were having a good relationship, and the nationalist was promoting it to the online space and was putting it out abroad, and it was, you know, creating a whole scene, and the media were reacting in panic, shooting bad press at the community, and they will shoot bad press at the community's relationship with the far right person, right? And then there'll be a sustained negative press for a few weeks, and then the first piece of good press will be connected to some unwitting local so-called leader or someone who's elected themselves as sort of a spokesperson will say, oh, we told him to go away, he was just interfering, we didn't really want him, or something like that. And they will get, I've seen it so many times, they will get a glowing review in the newspaper. It will be, unlike all the previous ones, the article will be totally fair, totally reasonable, almost like I could have written it. It's just honest, reasonable, fair. There are no lies, no demonization. It's perfect. But it comes with that thing where, well, you had to throw someone under the bus, right? So there's this Pavlovian training can kind of happen where the media will kind of throw bones to people and to communities. And the problem is that it's very difficult to explain to people, well, see, they're doing that intentionally. I know it sounds crazy. It sounds like too sophisticated, right? It would never be that intentional, but that's only the beginning of how sophisticated this whole system is. It's far more cunning than that, but that's the base level. And even that people can't bring themselves to fathom. They just think, no, you know, you're just spurging, you know, actually, or, you know, we're just going to normalize ourselves or whatever. The truth is, without being ridiculous, right? I'm not talking about being totally crazy or, you know, yourself, but within reason, not backstepping, not saying my best friends are foreigners and all this kind of stuff. By maintaining a sort of a radical edge, it can be reasonable but radical. That's actually what keeps the media paying attention. That's what keeps the energy going. That's what, in fact, you're more likely to get the centre shut down in your community because the regime will just want to stave it off. The closer you actually get to the so-called far right, the more likely you are to achieve your ends because they want, and at least we'll start again in another community. And so this kind of dynamic of regime terror is hard to explain to people. People are really good with it. It's excellent. But the problem is constantly trying to, you know, deal with the entropy of declining morale, not morale, let's say, but eventually the media attacks will start to influence certain people who aren't that experienced in the field, understandably. And you just have to sort of try to manage that backslide into milquetoast sort of. You know, a funny thing is, right? Again, this is hard to get newbies to understand. But when you come out and you say, get them out, right? Get them out. And it's totally uncooked, let's say. The media and the activists and the NGOs and the university undergrads and whoever, this irony people, lefties, whatever you call them, will stand back and hiss and be annoyed and call everybody racist, terrible people. But what they don't do is they don't laugh, they don't sneer, they don't look down their nose, they recoil, right?
Exactly.
But when people start to go, I'm the least racist person you will ever meet, I love asylum seekers, I want more asylum seekers, it's just that they don't have this.
They just need to come in legally.
Then that's what, Exactly, but that's when the let's say opposition, the regime class of people, that's when they start laughing, looking down their nose. That's when they get confident. They go, "Oh, look at Mister, I'm not a racist," and so they will still think you're a racist, and they'll kind of look down their nose and mock you and ridicule you for being so kind of craven, because realistically, that sort of regime person, because they sniff the same thing we sniff, which is, you're not telling the truth, are you? You're getting on your knees and begging. And that's what it is, and it's a weakness, and this is a strength game, you know. But anyway, to answer your question, the atmosphere is, you know, for the most part, is vital and strong and fierce. It's just always, this kind of answers your question, it's always an interplay, a mix, a sort of, you could say, a battle for which attitude prevails, you know, in any given community or on any given day or via any given activist or representative. That's the constant. The battle is, what is it Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil is down the center of every person, or whatever. It's kind of like the battle for whether you can win is not you versus the regime, it's you versus yourself. It's that internal battle. If you can stand up for yourself, the rest should surely fall into place. But that's the original battle. That's the hard part, you know, and it's going well, but yeah.
Well, there's just so much that I picked up on there, and this is what I've been doing since I started, you know, this Pox Populi persona in 2018, was just encouraging people to take ideas to their logical conclusion, to be honest, to speak truthfully and with confidence and bravery, and stop being, you used the word craven. It is such an apt word. Stop being craven, stop being apologetic, take your own side and take ideas to their logical conclusions. And ideas that need to be taken to their logical conclusions include, well, I'm all for immigrants as long as they come legally, because what is illegal can be made legal with a simple pen stroke. And when we have such traitorous politicians and their puppet masters ruling over us, you can't depend on, you know, oh, as long as it's legal, because, you know, like I just said, the illegal could be made legal in a blink of an eye. And you're right that it is about being honest. Just be honest and say, look, no one has a problem if you say Ukraine is for the Ukrainians. No one has a problem if you say Nigeria is for the Nigerians. All we're saying is that Ireland is for the Irish, that France is for the French. The Dalai Lama has said that Europe should be for the Europeans. If he can say it, why can't we? Well, because we've been psyoped and brainwashed and indoctrinated and beaten over the head with propaganda for all of our lives, that whenever a European takes his own side, all of a sudden that's the specter of a 1930s mustache man. And it's just, enough is enough. And so you mentioned, you know, speaking the truth. And I think that is so important, to be honest, to speak from a position of strength and honesty, and don't back down, because at the very least you'll be taken seriously and you'll be respected. And it's also important to learn from our enemies and to learn from even other life situations, like a business negotiation. So our enemies, or in a business negotiation, they don't start with their weakest position, right? When you're negotiating a deal or something, you don't start with the weakest offer. You start with something even higher than what you actually want. But you know that over the process of negotiations, you're going to have to make some concessions. You're going to have to tone it down a bit more, make the deal a bit more appealing to the other person. So you start off, you know, saying, I want $500 million or €500 million or whatever, for, you know, whatever, knowing that that's not what you really want. You'll be fine with $250 million, right? Everyone knows this. Everyone knows this negotiation tactic. And it's the same thing. If you start by saying, well, hey, I don't mind, you know, Ireland is the land of 1,000 welcomes. Everyone can come in. I don't mind if you know, there's only, you know, 5 native Irish kids in the local school, as long as everyone's coming in illegally, you know, it's all fine. Well, then what are you going to be protesting then? Where are you going? Where's the limit? You've already started on such a weak position that you can't negotiate from that. And our political adversaries don't do this. You know, they start with, we want to, for example, have drag queens dancing and reading stories to children in the local library. That's their starting point, right? And we have to react to this and say, no, okay, look, could you guys just do the drag queen story time maybe in a bar with no kids present? Could you just do that? Maybe just leave the kids alone. So we have to learn from experience. We have to learn from our enemies and think big and be honest and be confident. So Patricia, let me throw it back to you. What's been your experience with the atmosphere at the protests in your neck of the woods?
Right. I'm just going to follow up really on what Gerald just said there. He actually said it so eloquently, so my words will be very pale compared to what he just said. No, what I would like to just add to that, to what Gerald said there, was I think what's happening with a lot of the protests that are happening in Dublin and now that are spiraling across the country is that the protest movements are boxing clever. They're basically grassroots. They're women and children and buggies, mums and dads out in the street. And not alone that, there's also members of the the foreign national communities that have settled into Ireland, like the Polish community. You'd have some doctors from Nigeria, or people from different neck of the woods, some Lithuanians and that, and they've assimilated into Ireland. They're working here in the country, they're raising their children here, and they're also out in the street walking side by side with their Irish compadres, because they're concerned. They're actually very, very concerned as well. They're concerned for their own children growing up here. They're also concerned for the Irish as a whole. For they came here specifically for the fact of what Ireland stands for. It stands for family.
Mm-hmm.
It stands for culture. It stands for language, and this is why the protest movements are gaining traction, because the government and the media, as much as they try and paint us as far right, fascist, whatever, but the ordinary citizen that is looking at these protests are seeing, well, hang on here a second. A lady there is walking down the street with a buggy and she has a child in it and she's holding another child by her hand, and she's out protesting because she's scared of walking out at night, alone. So why have they been painted as far right? And there's foreign nationals marching alongside these people. So obviously there's something going on. People are seeing this that wouldn't be part of the movements, and they're also standing back and going, hang on here a second. These are my neighbours that are out here. Like, why have they been painted in this term? So that's why I think the movements are gaining a lot of traction, is because they're boxing clever. It's the local grassroots people, from all different communities that have assimilated into Ireland, that are getting out there in the street and marching and voicing their concerns. And I mean, at the end of the day, these people, including ourselves, we're standing in our truths. Once you stand in your truth, that's all that matters.
Can I just jump in there? Sorry,
sure.
Pox. No, I just want to, because listening to Patricia there, I just kind of, she kind of complimented what I was saying, and in a sense that I want to add on to what I was saying, right? Is that, like Patricia is saying that, well, there are foreign nationals there are people from Lithuania, etc., and there are ordinary people there, and it makes it not seem far right, and therefore that's kind of good, right? And then on the other hand, I'm saying, no, you shouldn't disassociate yourself from that sort of association, because it shows weakness and it's craven and all that. Someone listening might think me and Patricia are sort of at odds there, but again, like everything, it's more nuanced than that, because I agree with what I was saying, obviously, but I also agree with what Patricia is saying. And it's just a case of nuance and kind of common sense. I think it's good. Well, it's not good, but it's perfectly fine and reasonable to have foreigners marching with you who believe in Ireland. They believe in people not being steamrolled, and they're against the totalitarianism of it. I've known a lot of Eastern Europeans working with them and stuff like that. They don't want this stuff, for example, happening in Ireland, nor do they want it in their countries. You can sit down as an Irish nationalist and have a great chat with a Lithuanian, ask them all about their history, their culture, about their resistance against this kind of Western ideology, which is invading and taking over their country and displacing people everywhere, Irish and Lithuanian alike, right? Or wherever. Because the Irish, as our enemies, love to say, oh, we're going abroad as well. Yes, we are. We don't want that though, right? So there is a little bit of a sort of a international cooperation can happen between people, and that's good. Just the one point, all that stuff is good to a point. The only thing I would say to like someone who's becoming a budding activist in this stuff, like a local community person who's learning about it all suddenly, is that you don't want to just be sort of embracing this so-called far right thing, like spurging out like a lunatic. No, you want to keep that away. You want to keep this overly ideological stuff away, and you want to be normal, right? And that's good. Basically, just be normal. And the only thing that people don't understand is that how do I explain it? It's like going in that direction is great, and running away from the so-called far right accusation, like actively trying to run away from it. The thing people don't understand is that has a cost as well, right? That cuts your energy off. It cuts your power source off. Let's say your concentrated essence. It cuts it off, and it leaves you ideologically and morally rudderless. And that's a difficult thing to have people understand and appreciate, is that there is a cost to being co-opted by sort of spurgy far right stuff, by getting into ridiculous stuff. You can fill in the gap, right? By getting into all that stuff and being overly weird, right? There's a cost to it. But there's also a cost to running a million miles from anything that the media, which you already know are your enemy, there's a cost to running a mile from what they say is bad as well. So it's this interplay, and people just need, I think it's if ever I have a role to try to, if I speak to local communities in Ireland, and that is to try to respectfully get them to understand that you have to balance everything here. It's not just a scale with one side to it, where the more you run away from the far right stuff and the more normal you appear, the better. Isn't that brilliant? That direction is good too. It's like an X and a Y axis. It's two-dimensional, three-dimensional. It's got an extra dimension here, and just because the media say it's bad, that doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, it probably means it's kind of good.
These days,
but
yes.
Yeah, so
the opposite of the media, I think we've made is pretty good,
more or less.
Well, I would just say to that too, that this is something that people can take it however way they want, but I will try and be as clear as possible. I am an optics cuck. I think optics matter, and I do want to speak about this because I think that there are some brilliant optics going on in this protest, and I think that these things do matter. Again, like I said, they matter because we are a populist movement. And so in order to be a successful populist movement, you need people on your side. How do you get people on your side? By being well-dressed, well-spoken, by being something that attracts people. And, I think that, like you were saying, Gerald, even we spoke about this last week as well. No one is saying that a reasonable number of people can't, move around, and you can't have, Spaniards living in France, a few Spaniards living in France, a few Frenchies living in England, a few English living in Germany, a few Germans living in Greece. This is the history of Europe, is Europeans moving around. I'm living in a country that is not my native country. I don't think anyone is saying zero movement of peoples and things like that. But we shouldn't even have to make that caveat, make that disclaimer, because we are just normal people from 50 years ago. And we don't need to get into ideology of what, when they say far right, what does that even mean anymore? Because apparently to be in the far right just means that you don't want children to be chemically castrated, and you don't want to be completely ethnically cleansed in your own country. And apparently that makes you far right. There's no discussion into the actual, economic theory of right-wing politics or the social theories of right-wing politics. And when it comes to this issue in particular about immigration in Ireland, there is no need to get lost in the weeds of, ideologies, far right this, far right that. No, it is a simple and sensible position. I don't want my country to be the dumping ground, the perpetual dumping ground for strange men from all over the world. I don't want Irish children to be the minority in their schools. I don't want the Irish people to cease to exist in their one and only homeland. That is not an extreme position. It might be radical nowadays. It might be radical in that it gets to the root of the issue, and that is where the word radical comes from. But it is not extreme. And so, of course, because what happens is when you get attacked by, oh, you're far right or you're racist or anything, people want to defend themselves from those accusations. I'm not a racist. I'm not far right. And so they look for examples to demonstrate that they are not those things. For me, and for what I encourage people to the position to take is just take all of it for granted. Take it for granted that you don't hate the rest of the world's populations, the rest of the world's peoples. You don't want a world where no one can ever leave their country, no one ever can move to another country, no one can ever work in another country. Just take it for granted that that's not your position, and focus on what is your position, and don't get distracted by enemy frameworks. And what is your position? That Ireland is for the Irish, that Italy is for the Italians, that France is for the French, and that the native populations of these countries and the rest of the populations of Europe, the rest of the countries where this is happening, right? They have the right, earned through years, centuries of struggle, earned through the simple fact that they exist, to be the supermajority in their own countries. And that's it, full stop. So let's get into the optics of this, because I think there's some very good details here. And it's another one of the reasons why I feel so positively about the protests in Ireland. So let's hear your guys' thoughts on the symbol of the mother with her pram as the face of the Irish protest, as the face of the far right, as the Irish media, state media, is trying to portray it. So let's see. We haven't heard from Jerome Pointer or LTG, so if either of you two want to jump in on that, what are your thoughts on the optics of this?
I'll let LTG go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, mums with kids, you couldn't ask for better optics if you want to kind of talk about it like that. And even just on the flip side of that, you were just talking there, Pox, about kind of we've got normal opinions and we're the normal ones. Well, here's the thing as well. A lot of people, and I can kind of talking about this a lot recently, take a look at these NGO people and these journalists and who they actually are and what their background is. And the reality is, I'll bring back another example. So about 2 weeks ago, there was a mass on February the 18th. Sorry, no, 1 week ago, there was a mass NGO basically sponsored protest, and they got out about 8,000 people. The media were quoting 50,000, but then a couple of people checked into it, kind of using.
This was the Ireland for All, right?
Yes, yeah. It was the Ireland for All, yeah. And if you kind of break it down, what these people are, essentially what they are predominantly is middle class to upper middle class people with degrees in women's studies, and they're being propped up by these kind of fake government funded jobs. And the other thing too, even in terms of the optics, not only is it the woman pram buggy stuff is fantastic, but the optics of them is absolutely atrocious. I mean, one of the reasons why I think this is accelerating is this group of people, their only choice is to go far right and racist and shout things at people. So when you've got a bunch of just normal people going, listen, we're concerned about what's going on in the community, and you've got this angry blue-haired one shouting racist at you, that's not going to work. Like it's never going to work, because normal people don't, they don't, like, they're not bought over by any of that kind of content or that kind of thing. And I think it's just going to be an interesting thing going forward, because I think a lot of these journalists, a lot of these NGOs, are going to try and hold on to their positions and status as much as possible. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're against, like, nationalism as much, because if you had a more kind of nationalist conservative society, like, how many of these NGO jobs would actually exist? Like, for a lot of them, I think it really is as simple as that. So for them, beyond a couple of other things, the only thing they can really do is just yell and organize protests that no one really goes to, and call people far right and racist. And the more that goes on, especially with the fact that, like, people's faith in the media seems to be some bit deteriorating as well. And that's another point as well. Like, we're getting strange stories and kind of odd stories increasingly in the media. Like, there's a thing there. Everyone, I think maybe Jeremy Pointer might not know about it as much, but there's a story. A journalist called Kitty Holland in the Irish Times, like, reported this kind of incident whereby, like, a bunch of random locals approached a tent of or an encampment of immigrants with, like, baseball bats and hurleys and whatnot, and people started just calling her out on, like, just real, like, weird logical fallacies in her story, and the story doesn't make sense at all. So and people notice that stuff, and people, that kind of blows up in terms of, like, people, like, just losing their faith in all these kind of things. So
it's almost like, as frustrating as COVID was in Ireland, I saw a lot of, in Ireland, it seemed like it was a pretty hard time, just as it was here in Spain, to endure the years of the COVID silliness, madness, really. But it seems like the other edge of that sword could be swinging in our favor, in that now people are realizing that much of what we went through during those years was in fact a scam, was in fact nonsense, and therefore I really shouldn't be putting so much trust in the media and institutions that fooled me, and maybe even coerced, forced, even fully forced me to take a concoction multiple times. Maybe I'm feeling pretty bitter about that now. So that could also be playing into our favor as well, that people have lost, justifiably so, lost faith, lost trust in the media and in the government and various institutions.
Just to say, Pox, that, people were lied to for 3 years. That's a long time to be lying to the masses. And I've noticed normies in the last few months have started finally, questioning the whole thing. Why did I have to wash my hands every 5 minutes? Why couldn't I bring my grandkid to see my mother or my father? Or sorry, my grandkid to visit my parents, etc. So, and you mentioned, the certain concoction. A lot of people regret having got that, especially 2 or 3 times. So trust in the media has nosedived. Obviously, it's still very powerful, but it's definitely not what it was before the scamdemic. And this coincides now with, filling up these buildings in Ireland with foreigners, mostly military-age men. People hear what the media are saying. These are all from the Ukraine, or these are all from, war-torn countries. But I think a lot of people aren't buying it. And plus, people have come out of a lockdown. Their kids couldn't go out and play. There's going to be a new lockdown now when you have 300, 400 men from countries like Afghanistan, Somalia, in your little village. Your kids won't be able to go out and play. Your kids will be on a permanent lockdown.
Yeah, definitely. Well said. Puts things into perspective.
Sorry to interrupt. I completely agree with that, but also just to bring back up one point, I found anyway, kind of like just day to day in Ireland, like, you can bring up with people, the lockdowns were a waste of time, or we were too excessive, or the thing was a bit silly. Now, I mean, talking against a concoction is a bit, you know, it's a bit like maybe you don't go there as much, but like that, like the German pointer was saying, like that definitely is seeping through even here. And like we were Ireland was very, very compliant in terms of the concoction uptake and in terms of the whole lockdown situation. So yeah, I just wanted to add that there.
Yeah, like it was here in Spain, very compliant, very almost not even compliant, eager. So again, it's worth pointing out. We get frustrated with the norm. I have to remind myself of this even. We get frustrated with the normies. We even become scornful of the normies. But we have to remember that we live with them and we need them. And, you know, depending on the issue, you yourself might have been a normie not very long ago. So that's always worth keeping that in mind. And it also is worth, you know, patting ourselves on the back, giving ourselves a little bit of a round of applause, because it's you know, it's very easy to get downhearted and ask, what are we even doing, you know, with our presence on social media, or, you know, people who engage in real life activism, pamphleteering, things like that, or organizing conferences, etc. You know, what difference does it make? Well, it's a long game. It's a war. We are in a war. We are in an information and propaganda war. And every one of us is a soldier in it. There is no distinction between civilian and soldier. And the work we've done exposing the media and state lies and hypocrisies and conflicts of interest has helped people to, you know, start to see things from our perspective. And the work we've done exposing and documenting, even if it hurts to see, you know, for example, every time I go into Twitter, I see videos, you know, sometimes most of the times they come from the United States, some high school in the United States, but sometimes they're coming from someplace in Belgium or someplace in the Netherlands or the United Kingdom, and increasingly Ireland. You know, you see these videos of the fruits, the rotten fruits of the rotten tree of multiracial and multicultural societies. The violence, the anti-white violence, it seems to be always going one way. You know, in Ireland, even last year, you had the case of the Kurdish refugee who murdered 2 Irish gay men. You know, because again, the two cannot mix. You cannot be importing, you know, very conservative traditional Muslims, and at the same time promoting total sexual, you know, libertinism rather, and expect that to not blow up in your face. And so the fact that we've been documenting this, exposing it, sharing it, you know, I wrote a Substack essay about that incident in Ireland. Not to, you know, toot my own horn. I think, you know, probably 10 people read it, but it doesn't matter. All of it taken together means that we get to the point where we are now, where people are seeing those videos of, you know, a band of Maghrebis or Sub-Saharans fighting in the streets with baseball bats and or beating up some white kid in a playground in the United States or something. And they've seen it, and maybe even now they've lived through it, and they're realizing the consequences of these policies, and they're feeling braver that they can speak up and say, we don't want this. And that doesn't, again, it doesn't make you far right, even if that term doesn't bother you, or whatever. If that term does, it doesn't even matter. That's not wanting to get beat up by foreigners isn't a far right position. It's a normal position. And then, you know, to see that the response from that, from the Irish state, has been to implement this censorship bill, this hate speech law. I wonder if we could talk a bit about that. It seems it's such a strange coincidence that just at the moment when the Irish population, it seems the majority of the Irish population, I've seen polls saying that 64% of the Irish population is unhappy with immigration policy and thinks that too many people have come into the country. And now these protests have kicked off. Well, just at the time that all this is happening, now there's this hate speech law coming down the pike in which criticizing any protected group is going to be a hate crime that carries with it even a prison sentence, if I'm not mistaken. So what are your thoughts on this? If anyone has any insight on this particular development.
I'm happy to.
Sorry, go ahead there.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, Patricia.
We'll do
first.
Patricia, and then we'll do Gerald.
Yes, sorry there, Gerald. It's a typical woman just butting in at the wrong time. No, my view on it is that more than likely this bill will be passed. Okay, but at the end of the day, myself and Gavin on Off Grid Ireland, we're always going to speak our truths. I'm not going to curtail my speech for anybody. And if you know any Irish fiery person, they're not going to curtail their speech. I'm going to always speak my truths. And at the end of the day, it's just their way of just, trying to push us in our place, and, for Irish people to check themselves, before they speak, and, it's not on, and I'm not going to adhere to it. If I have something to say, I'm going to say it. If I have to say it in public, I'm going to say it in public, and I'm not going to tailor it to fit the government's narrative. I'm going to say it as it is. I'm a mother. I'm a farmer. I'm a member of the community, and I'm an Irish citizen. I'm an Irish person, and I'm a free woman, and I will say what I want to say, and nobody'll shut me up. Even you gang on here won't shut me up.
That's exactly the attitude to have. And again, like I said, we are at war, and wars are risky, right? So we are going to have to make sacrifices and take risks in order to keep fighting the information and propaganda war. Gerald, what are your thoughts?
Well, a few thoughts just on the censorship thing. Those laws, I don't know the legislative status of them, but they're coming in, right? Obviously. But yeah, it is a form of sort of, let's say, a form of warfare. It's quite open. Like one of the ministers signed this, whatever the latest pre-bill stage of some law or whatever. She was signing it in proudly, putting up her tweet, and of course, everything is intentional with these people. The picture, she's sitting at the table. She's signing the bill, and behind her is an EU flag and a gay flag, like LGBT flag or whatever.
Yeah. I responded to that on Twitter. I said, is the gay flag now an official flag of the Irish state? Or, like, what is this? The Irish flag isn't even in the picture.
But that's a very intentional move. So it's like that's almost like a sort of a declaration of war in a way. It's to say, oh, I'm signing it for the state that I work for, all right. It just is a foreign state. It's the EU, it's a gay thing, it's whatever. It's this multinational American thing. So that was one aspect. But another thing there are multiple sort of laws they're piddling around with. Another one is about people getting in other people's faces with cameras, or people recording other people on the street. As of now, that's legal in Ireland. You can do that. You can just record on the street. You can have some sort of verbal disagreement with someone on the street, and it can be recorded. And it's completely legal. You can do it with the guards as well, with the police. That too is completely legal, and they want to change that, obviously, because of the likes of Phil Dwyer and these people, because that's one of the central nodes of how this is working. People are watching it via these streamers and watching these incidents take place and that. So they want to get rid of that. The other one they're talking about is you can't discriminate. It will be hate speech if you discriminate against race, religion, gender, all that stuff. But they've, of course, recently been talking about adding migrant status into that, because they've noticed what Irish people are doing is they'll see some guy, clearly a Middle Eastern, right, visibly, audibly, it's a bit some Arab or African guy or something. I don't know, walking naked down the road, screaming, beating someone up, trying to sexually assault a woman. It's some video that leaks online and goes viral, right? People will say, oh, video of a migrant man. Now, of course, nobody knows exactly the status, the legal paper status of that guy necessarily. What they're saying is he's a migrant. Look at him. Listen to him. He's clearly a migrant. We're in Ireland. So it's this kind of subtextual thing that Irish people use some people could call it a dog whistle. It's not even really a dog whistle. It's just people observe. It's actually just an accurate frame of reference. But of course, if they were to do it by race, gender, people could use migrant, and that would kind of slip through the net. So they're changing it. So they're just designing the law to just wrap this stuff all up. But as Patricia said, nobody is going to shut us up. Nobody's going to shut the Irish people up. Because of all countries, Ireland is not a place with our historical memory where you want to start creating martyrs, be they people you kill or possibly even worse, people you imprison for their beliefs. That's in our cultural and biological DNA via the likes of Patrick Pearse, etc. So, they know that. So they have to be very careful, but at the same time, they have to try to put this thing back in the box with their little stupid laws. Yeah, that's my piece on that.
Gerald, can I just ask you a quick question, or actually maybe last through Gale as well, and the rest of the lads on the thing there. Is Ireland Sharia compliant? I had a guest on there last week from Northern Ireland, and she was telling me that Northern Ireland is Sharia compliant, and basically all of the hate speech laws that are over in the UK and Northern Ireland are all pertaining to that. So I was just wondering if we in Ireland are Sharia compliant.
On my end, I wouldn't know, to be honest with you. Gerard might know.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute my mic. No, I don't know, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, what does it mean to be Sharia compliant? As in, there are state-mandated legislation on the books that make it so, or community guidelines?
Well, it's basically the hate speech laws that they have in the UK are pertaining to being Sharia compliant. So you cannot discuss, parts of the what is the Bible or the book they use, Quran, is it the Quran? Mm-hmm. You cannot talk about a Muslim. You cannot talk about Islam, in normal conversation in public, that you can get arrested for it, you can, get fined for it. It's all involving all of the hate speech laws that they have over in the UK there the last few years. And basically it's basically in relationship to being Sharia compliant. So I was just wondering, will this be with the new hate speech laws that herself is trying to bring in? Will that entail being Sharia compliant as well?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think a lot of these policies get copied. They pretty much follow the same blueprint, the same scaffolding, with the necessary regional or national revisions, modifications, but they all have the same objective in mind, which is to simply silence the people who are complaining about the disastrous consequences of policies that are unpopular. LTG, what are your thoughts on the censorship question in Ireland and the motivations behind it?
Yeah, sorry. I was on mute there. So I think there's a few things. There was a very interesting case with a teacher called Enoch Burke. And the reason I bring him up was because he got himself into a situation whereby basically he refused to. He was a secondary school teacher, and he refused to address this kid in his class by a transgender identifying kid as he, her, or they, them. And he ended up kind of like in trouble for that. And then he ended up in jail in Mountjoy for contempt of court. But long story, that story was very interesting because what happened was like a lot of the media kind of went after the guy in a big way, like, oh, the guy's a, you know, far right Christian evangelical kind of guy. And the reaction for a lot of normal people was like, you know, he did the right thing because he didn't use these kind of transgender pronouns, and we don't want tranny stuff for kids. And the reason I kind of bring that up is because that's a classic example of what Gerald was talking about there with the martyr stuff. They kind of turned him a bit into a little bit of a, especially before Christmas, into a kind of a martyr figure. And with those kind of hate speech laws, I think they are genuinely kind of worried about that. So if they are going to do it, because the other thing too with the media here, and the media have tried this trick again and again and again. They want their evil far right, right story. They really, really want that, and they've been trying to turn all these stories, the murder of this poor girl Ashton Murphy, the two gay lads you were talking about there, like that were murdered. They've all tried to put a kind of a evil far right kind of swing on them, but it hasn't worked. And it hasn't kind of seeped into the population. So they were supposed to bring in these hate speech laws at the end of last year, but now it's been extended out to the end of summer. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I mean, one of them is in the new hate speech laws, they're talking about like the Minister for Justice, the acting Minister for Justice guy now, Simon Harris. He's talked about bringing in a part of or updating the legislation so that if you criticize migrants or their status, migrant status, then that could be classified as a hate issue or a hate crime. Now, I think like one of the things with that is the hate speech laws. On one hand, like I said, they're kind of like maybe getting a bit of kind of cold feet in some areas. But on the other hand, they're going to use the hate speech laws as maybe part of this kind of like dog whistling fake opposition. So, I mean, like they'll do something like they'll make an announcement for something completely outrageous with the hate speech laws. And then they'll play the whole kind of like dog whistling thing. And kind of Varadkar comes in and says, well, that's a bit too extreme. So we'll meet you kind of halfway. And then, it's like the negotiation thing you were talking about earlier. And then people are kind of more likely to accept that going forward. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's like, in that way. But I don't think it's, if they are going to start prosecuting people for it, like they're kind of worried that they will turn someone into a martyr if they do that. Like the Enoch Burke thing that happened a bit last year. They don't want that again. So if they were going to do it, it would be like an absolute, like blatant, obvious, almost no one can disagree with it example.
Yeah, this is going back to what I said
just at
the start about how it seems like this was one of my reasons for holding out hope for Ireland, is that it seems like they have there's a defense mechanism, there's an immune system. And I saw a video that went viral. It was some young people chanting free Enoch in a discotheque in Ireland somewhere. So certainly he has become a bit of like a folk hero, a martyr, and so the censorship of him and the legal persecution of him, the lawfare being waged against him, has backfired in that sense. Okay, I have a final question for all of you. I'll put it to all of you, and then we'll take a few questions from the various chats on YouTube and Odyssey. Again, if you have a question that you really want me to catch, send it to the Entropy super chat. That's Entropy livestream /Pox Populi. So the question I'll put to the panel is this: where do you see this going forward, this protest movement? Where do you see objectives being accomplished? What would you like to see? What is your recommendation, your advice for anyone who's listening, anyone who's involved? what is something that you would offer as advice or encouragement? Again, I want to try and keep this positive and remoralizing. So basically, what are your thoughts going forward? What are the objectives that can be achieved? And what advice or encouragement do you have?
Well, I guess going forward, I think people just need to be proud of who they are, and be strong enough to stand for what they believe is right. And I firmly believe that nature has the correct way, of balancing out the universe. We seem to be in a time of evil now, where bad is good and good is bad. So I firmly believe that there's cracks taking place in all the different sections, the LBGT scenario going on in schools. A lot of parents are becoming quite aware of the doctrine that's coming into the schools, and they're not happy about it. There's teachers now standing up and saying, no, I ain't teaching that to any kids in my class. And so there's little cracks appearing there. The minister of education has come out and said that they will be looking at an option of parents can opt out of it if they feel that it's not something that they align with. So there's cracks appearing in that section. The people getting out in the streets now protesting. It's more and more every time there's a protest, there's more people standing up and joining it. So the government is becoming quite scared now, and they've started to target different people that have put themselves out there. And we're just continuing to move forward. We're just speaking our truths, and I think our truths will set us free in the end. And I think we're in a good place. We're coming in. Springtime is just here. We're coming into summer, and I think it's a great time of year, and it's given us all great energy. And we're getting so much support, from all around the world. They're all looking to us here in Ireland, and they're also proud of what we've done so far. And I think we can take great umbrage in that, and keep doing what we're doing. Our ancestors left us, this land, and it's our duty to pass it on to our grandchildren and our children in the exact same state that we have found it, and hopefully in a better state. And that's where we have to stand, and that's where I'm going to stand, and that's where my gang on Off Grid Ireland stand as well. Our job is to safeguard our future of Ireland for our children and our children's children.
Absolutely. What's the situation regarding homeschooling like? It's legal in Ireland, is it not? And do you know many people in Ireland who practice it?
I know, yes, homeschooling is still legal. I don't know if they'll target that eventually down the road. I doubt it. Yeah, I do. I know two families that are doing it, and the children in a Burke's family were homeschooled. Look at his family. They're all highly educated and highly in different sectors of the community. I know two families personally myself, and the children are very, very grounded. They're very, well spoken. Your very skill set is amazing. They're able to cook, they're able to sew, they're able to build little things, use a hammer, use a saw. Those are all the skills that our ancestors, that our granddads and grannies taught us. And with this modern times now, with the different equipment that we haven't passed that on to our children. So I think homeschooling is a fantastic avenue to bring all those skills to the children and not have them indoctrinated to feel bad about themselves and wondering about their sexuality. And it gives a child a broader scope of the world by homeschooling.
Ironically, yes. It's funny because the potential downside to homeschooling can be a child who's a bit insulated and isolated. But you can add another name to the list of people who've been homeschooled, because I was homeschooled until I was 14 years old. And if it's done right, the horizons of that child can be broadened in a way that state schooling just can't do. And I think I think that it will be a very bad move on the chessboard if the state were to go after homeschooling. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But I hope that the Irish people would defend it tooth and nail, because given what we've seen coming out of the education systems all over the West, homeschooling now just seems more important than ever. Okay, German Pointer, what do you think are your thoughts then going forward? What are some advice or encouragements that you would give to this Irish nationalist movement?
Well, unfortunately, I can't be very upbeat. I know you want an upbeat stream, but thousands and thousands of these migrants, these military-aged men, will continue coming into the country. Obviously, it's great that people are getting out and protesting, but the ports are still there and they keep coming in. The media is against the Irish people. The government is against the Irish people. You talked earlier about, hate speech and all that. That's just, trying to put it on the books that the Irish will be second-class citizens in their own homeland. So the only way it's going to play is that there will be, at some stage, and I won't predict when, but there will be an actual war, because throughout history, no ethnic group willfully chooses to be replaced in their own homeland. It's never happened. There's always been a fight back. And perhaps it's time that the Irish, we're called the Fighting Irish. Well, maybe we should earn our stripes yet again.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate the realism. I've earned the moniker of party pooper Pox. So I won't criticize you for taking a realistic view on things. It's also important to do that. And false hope is something that we should always avoid, and anyone who sells it should be ashamed. So no worries there. Okay, Gerald Murphy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, just to pick up on what German Pointer just said, the kind of realistic, more, let's say, more realistic point of view, or sober analysis of it. The idea that we go full scale sort of, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, because we all know about Drew Harris and his list of 20 activists that he's targeting, for arrest, they say. I mean, that's the thing we didn't get to talk about, but these things are like real. People need to see, it's another story. But
if you've got,
well, yeah, okay. So
go on, feel
there's
free.
okay. So there's an article a couple of articles in a row came out, and I'll get back to my conclusion. But there's a few articles came out in Irish mainstream media in a row talking about the Gardaí, the police, are monitoring so-called far-right activists and are keeping a close eye on them. These messages are intended for. They're intended to spook the public, to make the public think, well, I wouldn't want to be far right because that's like being an ISIS or something, right? So it's meant to implant that, but it's also a direct message to the likes of us to say, we're just waiting, right? We're just waiting to arrest you guys, and it's meant to spook people. Anyway, so we're used to that. They've been doing that for years. Since November, they picked up the pace of those articles, those little messages, those mafia messages, right? To say, because they really are openly at this point, the police, and I don't mean to say this in a kind of a glib or simplistic fashion, I mean it literally, they are exposing themselves very much as just a sort of a a gang, a thug gang of this illegitimate regime state. They're kind of not pretending anymore. The pretense of like, oh, we're an unbiased police, but secretly you all know we're biased. That pretense is gone now. They're just open about it, right? And many examples of that. Anyway, so they've been coming out with these articles saying that the far right better be careful, or we're monitoring the far right. And in one article in specific, they said Gardaí plan to make arrests of 20 far right agitators. They never said anyone committed a crime. Nobody is alleged to have committed a crime at all. But they say they're looking to make arrests for these agitators. And they used the number 20. And a few days later, this activist for an NGO, this kind of Antifa NGO that's state and corporate funded in Ireland, she was on a news show, like a primetime evening show, talking about the rise of the far right. She said something very curious. She said, we have been monitoring activists, agitators. She used all the same words as that Gardaí article, right? She said, yeah, we're looking at about 20. And, obviously you don't have to be a crazy conspiracy theorist to kind of see the comparison there. She said 20 or 22. It's the same people. So the state are obviously funding people to write, Antifa effectively, to write arrest lists to hand straight to the Gardaí. They probably have a direct line, basically. Exactly, yeah. And they said, we're waiting. They basically, in effect, I'm paraphrasing, but they basically said, we're waiting for you to slip up. You say the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing, and it's clear those agitators, of course, all of us guys were like kind of secretly thinking, I am on that list, aren't I? There's a bit of disappointment probably for people if they weren't on it, right? Because it is actually a very noble list to be on, I would say, right? But yeah, so that's them. So I want to talk, when you kind of talk loosely about, we're in a battle for survival or something, I always second guess myself to think, wait, is someone going to kick my door in now for saying using the wrong word or whatever? Anyway, as this escalates and grows more vociferous, this little argument between the state and us people, it could turn into something very intense in a sense, like like dominating all the news, all sorts of things happening. And then the nationalists take over the country and restore like the Irish state, the Gale stat, as they call it, right? This whole utopian nationalism. If someone could say that's not going to happen, that's pie in the sky. I mean, I think it is. And no one really believes that that's quite going to happen. There's too many people here. There's too much damage done. The enemy is too powerful and all that. But you could have something short of that. A version of that, a restored state. I like to think some sort of glasnost of I like to think that Ireland could lead or play a leading role in the rolling back from the Western world of, you could call it a rainbow curtain, right? This kind of mass pan-Western totalitarianism. Ireland could play a role in that, because I believe that the populist wave of 2015, 16, 17 wasn't the beginning and end of a saga. I think it was just the beginning. I think we're still in the beginning, the infancy of learning about this. Yes, the demographics are against us, but we're still learning and figuring out how this totalitarian system works and developing the right ideology. Think of people who wrote against, think of, what is the name, Václav Havel or whatever, these kind of people who wrote against communism and developed a thorough analysis of the beast that they were opposing. We're still writing that book, so to speak, I believe. And thus, we can either have something short of a revolutionary state where we get back to this Shire-style nationalism or something, right? Or not. But I don't think it's a choice between that, some sort of destruction. Another way of looking at it, and this might sound kind of pathetic to some, but while we're seeing how this plays out, we raise the consciousness of people, we get to know people. That matters. People don't understand that matters. Like, even if this movement currently were to go on for another 2 or 3 months, and for some reason, I don't think it will do that. I think it will rise. But if it were to peter out a little bit, well, it'll come back in a while, right? So everything has value. Everything positive has value, one way or another. You don't always know what it is, but it's always better. And I'm not accusing Pointer, of a German painter. That's a funny one.
No, he was Austrian, so it's okay. We didn't have a
perfect. Okay, I was thinking
some of the guys, some of the German painters.
But anyway, so like, these like everything is sort of beneficial to a point. Everything positive. Failing some sort of cool new state of perfection, I believe in sort of equal rights and civil rights. That's another thing, by the way, is just something like the hate speech laws, right? You could answer the hate speech laws by saying, well, I'm going to do what you're calling hate speech. I'm going to do it and see how you arrest me and see how we get on. The other thing you can do is just point out, look, a black guy can stand up for his identity and his victimization and his ethnic interest, and he doesn't get in trouble, but I do. Now I can just start playing your liberal game and say, this is just, I can, in a way, Mott and Bailey it, in the sense that, well, someone can be looking for, they just want equal rights under the law, right? And so you can have a variety of things happening, but I believe it is worth pursuing. I look at places like the Czech Republic. It is was very nationalist up until like a year or two ago. They took in like 500,000 Ukrainians, and in Croatia they were very nationalist up until about 2 months ago, and they joined the Schengen area, and their asylum claims have tripled by 700%, I think, or not tripled, but went 7 times higher. Sorry, yeah, all that because you go looking around for like bastions, right? Bastions, the based east. Visegrad or whatever, and they're all being tumbled down by this totalitarianism. It's not about 2% of people in the Czech Republic, or Czechia, as they call it. 2% of people were polled a few years ago as being in support of taking in refugees from war, not fake ones, but real ones, actually from a war. 2% of them said unconditionally that those people should be taken in permanently. It's one of the most anti-asylum countries going. And this totalitarian American-led thing just sweeps over people. So in a sense, we are all in it together. And I do think we have to develop our ideas. It's about human nature. At the end of the day, I don't just simply claim the right to be an Irish person in my own country unaffected by all this stuff because of what happened 200 or 700 years ago and all of this. That's relevant. But also, it's just human nature to everybody, whether you're an indigenous, this person or that person or another. It's human nature to be a little bit territorial, to have the familiar, to have all of these things. We're talking about a battle basically for just simple human nature here. So we have a lot on our side in that sense. We just have to develop our ideas, get to know each other, push forward. But, whether it turns into some sort of pitched battle of some description, whether it is just fighting for your kind of civil rights or just getting to know people from your group and sort of integrating with them and, let's say, backing each other up as we become this despised, dystopian minority or whatever. Either way, the fight, so to speak, is worth pursuing no matter which end. So it's always good. And on that basis, one of the things you can do is just, you can do videos, you can talk to your friends if you don't want to do that. You can just reach out to people with a positive heart, right? Not to sound too soft, because people are so divided from us in ideologically. Sometimes you meet someone who's like a liberal normie, and to even begin to explain, it's like two people speaking a different language. So just like you would with like a shy cat or something, I think it's important to remember to have a heart for these people and try to say, you know what, besides the NGO people and our sworn enemies, most people are just like the cat. You just have to put out the food and go, we're not bad. We just want normal things. And can I please explain it to you? Would you like to hear my point of view? Would you be interested? This kind of thing. So we can do that. We can reach out to people, and I don't see any downside to doing it. And I think, I'm happy to say that I think Ireland will be at the forefront of that. But I would extend that right and that compassion to every people in the world, basically, because it's just a human thing we're looking for at the end of the day.
Just to say there, as a follow-on to what Gerald has said, you can make a difference. I know it sounds corny, but you can make a difference by simply dropping a few pennies here and there. You could ask the barman a question. Do you not think it's strange that ... And just leave him with the question. Let him ponder over it. Everyone can do that. This thing isn't just, it's not just online. It's not about streams. You can get out and about as well. And you'll be amazed at the difference you can make. I know, we hear about the NPC meme a lot, but there are people who are normies, and maybe they're beginning to think along your lines, and you simply mentioning something could help them on the way. So I think everyone has a moral responsibility to give their opinion and to speak to people when they're out and about.
Definitely. This goes back into the old Marshall McLuhan line about being in an information war, and there are no distinctions between civilian and soldier. We all have to be doing our part, and it is a question of planting those seeds and having those conversations. And it might come with a cost. Being a soldier isn't easy. I've lost friends. I've even lost family who despise me simply because I don't think that the European people should be ethnically cleansed from their own homelands, amongst other issues of the day, but primarily that one. Okay, last true Gale. Fittingly, you are the last one to give your thoughts on going forward and what to expect and any advice and encouragement.
Well, going forward and what to expect. So what's happened obviously over the past few months is that there's been an enormous amount of energy, and the growth rate of this has been so fast. Like I think, or at least I'll speak from my end, like it's been amazing to see. So in the short to medium term, what I think is going to happen, I'll just kind of sum that up. So in the short term, this is not going away, and it's not going away for a couple of reasons. One is obviously like the increased amount of people kind of coming in, but another one is what happened after the Ukraine war and this started kicking off was a lot of hotels started entering into these kind of contracts, in particular year-long contracts that, they Gombeen guys, they'd end up with a bunch of these like, people in their hotel, and the war will be over and that's it. But what's happening now is that a lot of these places and a lot of pressure are under pressure, and they're not wanting to kind of like redo or kind of extend the contracts. So you're going to have a situation, and most of these contracts are going to expire in March. You're going to have a situation whereby there's going to be a ton of people where they don't have anywhere to put them, because Ireland literally is like there's no accommodation anymore. Like Ireland is completely full. Like, so depending on where they put them, I mean, the Department of Integration passed this statutory instrument thing, or applied it rather, and basically like, they have kind of power to like take a school or take a gym and just put these people there. So because of that, like they have to put these people somewhere, and depending on what the community that they end up in, they're just going to piss off people, and the thing is just going to accelerate kind of more and more and more. So that part of it is not going away anytime soon. In terms of people responding to it and the different forces that are responding to it, the left or these kind of NGO people, we had a similar situation with the water protests. So we had a mass kind of protest of thousands and thousands of people back in 2013, 2014. And that kind of ended because the kind of left-wing NGO complex were able to kind of capture that. That's not going to happen this time, because they're stuck with just calling people racist and far right. And that effect or that impact is not working. So they're not going to be able to capture the energy there. And then finally, from the so-called kind of nationalist end, there a lot of them are doing good stuff, but at the same time, they don't have any TDs in the Dáil, or they don't have any council seats. And when people are kind of normal people are looking for solutions, they can't really offer them. I mean, they can support them, and their support will grow, but right now they're a bit, because of the position they're in a bit powerless. So you have all this kind of just energy kind of going, and you have all these different factions and groups trying to capture it, I would say. And then that leads to the last group, which is or the last two groups, which are like Fine Gael and Sinn Féin. And so what Fine Gael are trying to do, or they've talked about stuff like, we're issuing more deportation orders, deportation orders, not deportations, that kind of thing. And then the whole kind of thing, like, with Sinn Féin as well. Will they be able to kind of capture that, or will they be able to like do the whole kind of like, see, the thing is like, in terms of like dog whistling or doing kind of a fake Tory kind of capture that, the problem is like, and it's one of the, I think the reasons we're in it blew up in Ireland is, like I was saying earlier, we don't have. I mean, we've got great people here, but we don't have kind of like a big GB News kind of thing to act as that kind of controlled or opposition. So because of that, they're kind of scrambling to build that right now, but it's never existed. And what the Fine Gael are trying to do, they're trying to make Varadkar into this kind of like, you know, he'll say a non-PC or base quote or whatever. They're doing that a little bit with him. But the thing is, people don't like Varadkar. Varadkar has absolutely no charisma whatsoever, and people hate him. So that's not going to work either. So in the next few months, this will continue. And where that goes from there after that, I don't know. I think they're going to try and combine those kind of like, you know, Varadkar-y kind of comments with the actual stick approach, which is where the hate speech laws come in. But then again, you have the situation there whereby, like, you know, like I was saying before, with like Enoch Burke, and they don't want to turn people into martyrs either. And then this blows up even more. Just to finish up on that point, I think one big thing which they really are scared of, and it will cause this to blow up or increase more in terms of how it grows, is the middle class. So one thing I've kind of found is that, like Gerald was saying earlier about, like, you know, kind of Dublin or inner city Dublin people, they'll be like, you know, they'll say it as it is. Whereas kind of if you go into kind of more middle class areas, they will agree with you, but or a lot of them will. But they're kind of more scared to say it, or you have to kind of phrase it in the right way. If this ends up in a scenario whereby, because of the fact they have to put someone somewhere, if that group of people ends up in a middle class area, then this can blow up, or this can massively increase even more, because what will happen then is you've got all the connections, and then this ends up in the courts as all of that. And it becomes more socially acceptable to even talk about. It is becoming more and more socially acceptable to talk about. But if that happens with that kind of middle class slant, it'll increase even more. But depending on what the crops up, I mean, even stuff like what'll add to this is the fact that, I mean, even something as simple as the weather. If you've got all these protests and you've got really good weather for the next few months, more people will turn up. If you've got crap weather, less people will turn up. So there's so many variables like that. But ultimately, this is not going away, at the very least, for the next couple of months or a few months.
Well, that's excellent to know. And I would just say my own thoughts on this, and take them for what they're worth. You know, I'm not there, unfortunately. I do wish I could be there. I would not hesitate to participate in one of these protests and do my part. But I would just say, and again, this is for anyone listening who's involved in these movements, or knows someone who's involved, or is someone, like the Durham Pointer said, who is willing to have these conversations and ask these questions. For me, one of the reasons, again, why I've been positive about these developments in Ireland, as opposed to in the past where I've been quite pessimistic, is that I think there are achievable objectives. So for me, what's important is that the Irish people stay focused on those objectives. There has to be the closure of a migrant center. There has to be the closure of an asylum center, preferably the one in East Wall. Like that's what kicked it off, and that's what has to close. The hotels, through social pressure, peer pressure, community pressure, have to refuse to take in any more of these, wandering men, whatever term you want to use. But I will not use the term refugee, and I will even hesitate to use the term migrant, because those terms are misnomers in this case. And so I think it's important to have the objectives always in mind, always eye on the prize, eye on the target, because it can't just be a few months of protesting and a few months of national groundswell. There has to be something accomplished at the end of the day. And going back to the November press release from the original East Wall protesters, they had an objective. They said, we're going to be here, I think it was every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday until this center is closed, until this plan is scrapped. Something like that has to be the target, and it has to be accomplished. And I would just really implore and encourage the Irish people to stay focused on that. And then also there's the question, there's the issue of the bad actors. Gerald has mentioned this. LTG, you just kind of alluded to it as well. The people who will, squabble for supremacy of the protest movement, squabble to be higher up on the hierarchy and make it about them. Grifters, you might call them as well. This was a reason why I was not fond of the Canadian truckers blockade, because it was full of grifters. It was full of politicians latching onto it for their political gain. It seems like the Irish protesters have been doing a very good job of keeping the bad apples out of the apple basket, right? But we just had Tommy Robinson show up a few days ago, and he had barely set foot on Irish soil, and he was already pushing, civic nationalism. See, the Irish love foreigners. We're not racist, blah, blah, blah. And he's got all that baggage attached to him. So I think another important thing is to just, it ties into keeping your eyes on the prize. We don't want replacement migration. We don't want strange foreign men of, military age coming into our schools, filling up hotels, outnumbering us in our small towns and villages and communities. We don't want that. And we don't need anyone to come along and try and make this about them or their political party or their online, e-celeb personality and muddle it with their various ideologies or hot takes or anything like that. So those would be the two things that I, if I were there, if I were involved in these, that would be my concern. And so to anyone listening, those are my thoughts. Take them as you will. So Gerald Murphy says, wandering men. I love that. I include myself in that. I've wandered around a bit too, but not with the intention of, milking the state or abusing the host nation that has allowed me to, live amongst them. I guess I'm a normal person.
It's a different type of wandering than what you're doing, But these are wandering men.
So, I say because oftentimes I just refer to them as invaders, straight up invaders. But that might sound a bit harsh, and but it's like, what else can you call it? And I've even argued that this modern species of immigration that we are witnessing is even worse than some of the invasions in history. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions or comments. There's been a pretty good chat on Odyssey as well. Some good back and forth there, good comments there, but I didn't see any questions necessarily. I did see a few on YouTube throughout the night. I think I addressed them more or less. So if anyone has any questions for the members of the panel, again, I've mentioned the super chat link on Entropy. If there's any questions that I missed throughout the night, you can go ahead and resend them on whichever platform you're watching, and I can catch them now. So I'll give you a moment, audience, to send in some questions and comments. There was that one, I don't know if we got to it, Finn Wraith, I believe it was, who had asked ages ago about if there are any nationalist political parties, if there's any alternative to the mainstream political parties. So what are the panel's thoughts on the National Party? Let's see. Gerald, do you want to jump in on that one?
Well, it's not much of an answer. What I'm going to say is that I tend to stay out of that kind of thing, because you basically have two parties in Ireland that are primed or model themselves as the solution for this sort of situation. You have the Irish Freedom Party, which is a sort of foundationally a Eurosceptic party, but they're against mass immigration, etc. And then you have a more kind of edgy, more doctrinaire, I suppose you could say, radical right party called the National Party. And they are what they are. People from both, public figures and activists from both parties, will make scathing criticisms of the other. Sometimes they'll act kind of like peacefully, but then everybody knows they're vying for this market, you could call it. They will both claim to care about helping the country out and all of that kind of stuff. I make no criticism of either, basically, or what I tend to stay out of it because, being an activist / journalist in my role, in my position, comes with enough baggage, enough NGO attacks, enough this, enough that. So for all the squabbling and for all of the drama, I have enough of it with just being a person out there with my name and face to be wading into that one. People can kind of make what they will of it, basically, but it's not my role or not my job. Maybe someone else has something to say about those parties in a more salient kind of way. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, from my end, my kind of interest more, like I said, is kind of like predicting trends or that kind of thing. I could talk about stuff like, what I think personally is involved or what is required in terms of like, getting votes and, the kind of like things or numbers behind that. But I'm not affiliated with either party. I'm not a member of any of those parties. And I don't know their inner goings on, so I can't kind of comment on any of that. The only thing, like I was kind of saying before, and this is kind of an interesting thing. I'll just kind of maybe interject, or I'll just kind of like sidetrack this a little bit. There's one similarity that this has, especially kind of like the East Wall, inner city Dublin areas, and the similarity is to the 1970s and the 1980s in inner city Dublin. You had a massive heroin problem, and these groups started emerging, these kind of like community independent groups. One of them was called the Concerned Parents Against Drugs. And the reason that happened is because the growth rate of like people getting involved in like heroin and whatnot was so great that the public communities went on among themselves to kind of do something about it, set up anti-drug groups and all that. And the reason I kind of just bring that up is things are just growing so fast right now that, and I forgot to mention this point earlier, things are growing so fast right now that it might just, in terms of like capturing the energy of what's going to happen, it might not even be as much these two parties, but these independent kind of groups that might just end up kind of creating themselves as a result of this, and also a kind of a slew of independents. So in terms of the political stuff, you obviously have those two parties, but I think like another possibility is like you end up with a bunch of independents, and you end up with something or some people emerging out of these potential groups, like what happened in the 70s and the 80s in Dublin, kind of come up again. That's maybe a little bit of a ramble and bit of a off topic, but yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
I'll just say that I don't know much about either party. I have seen some speeches by Justin Barrett of the National Party, and he's probably one of the best orators on the go. However, one thing that makes me cringe a lot is when, the current situation, you've thousands and thousands of migrants coming in probably every day now on buses, and you hear people saying, oh, wait till the next election, I'll vote against them, So you have people who still believe in this democratic process. They still believe that, if I don't vote for that party and I vote for this party, that's going to make a difference. When your country is being invaded, the ballot box is not really going to do much.
Yeah.
I mean,
when people,
I definitely agree with a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah. When people say there's no political solution, I usually like to add the word now at the end. There's no political solution now. And it's important to make a little distinction. Political solutions don't necessarily mean political parties are going to solve them, or an election is going to solve, some of these issues. There are political solutions in that there are, and this is why people in the nationalist community, the online community, the far-flung community of nationalists, it's important that we have lawyers on our side, people who know the law, because there are plenty of things, plenty of laws on the books that could be used to our advantage. There are EU treatises, there are UN treatises that could be used to our advantage. But oftentimes, the nationalist movement is comprised of, people who have jobs and working class folks, families, and they don't have time to, pour over legal documents, or even they don't have the money to hire, high-flying lawyers. And then ultimately, maybe those high-flying lawyers don't want to represent, the far right. So we have to worry about that. But I would agree that, there aren't many political parties that represent a solution, and I would advise against putting your faith in a political party. But there are other political avenues and legal avenues that I think are always worth remembering. But yeah, it's the political party situation throughout Europe is pretty dismal. Okay, some questions here. There is a question from Chandler Holmes. He asks, please forgive any of my ignorance on this issue, but will demographic replacement be a unifying issue for different sectarian interests in Ireland, i.e. Protestant versus Catholic? Who wants to take that one?
That's quite a hot potato. That one. The politics of the so-called North, or the so-called the North. It's a whole other axis, we could say. I don't think it's necessarily a unifying issue. I don't know. It's a tough question to answer. It's fraught, because you have the whole Sinn Féin element down here. The idea of, like, the nationalism has just got so many angles to it in this country. You have the various types of nationalism. There's the true nationalism that we're talking about. There is the nationalism of our own particular Irish history, which is also relevant and I believe in. And when I personally travel to Belfast or to County Down or to Fermanagh or Tyrone, I don't think I'm going to any other country, so these things matter to us as well. But of course you have all those loyalists up there too, who have their own feelings. And I don't know, it's I suppose maybe it can be unifying for some people, and for other people it will be like a multiple wedge issue where, like, one side is being uber liberal, the other side has some people who are closer to us, and just a mess. I think of how much of a mess things are in general politically for people of our general point of view. This getting added into it, it's impossible for me to basically answer that. Part of loyalists there's wings of loyalism that are known to be very sort of conservative, religiously conservative, Israel supporting, Zionist. You mentioned Tommy Robinson there. People along those lines. You have Catholics who are traditional too, who think Sinn Féin represent them, but they don't. It's complicated. One thing though I will say, and I'm going to use the term the North, by the way, and Irish people who live up there hate when we use that expression because it feels like we're alienating them, like us people in the so-called Republic are talking about them like they're foreigners or something. I'm just going to use the term I'll say the 6 counties. It's better. So the 6 counties, when you go up there from here, it's interesting. There is that difference, right? One of the things I tend to notice is that there's not a whole lot of sort of foreigners. I feel like there's more businesses too. Down south, everything's a Starbucks or a Tesco's or something. Up there, you'll have like Bob's Lawyers, Bill's Bakers. You know, you'll have a lot more. There's a different social fabric and economic fabric up there, I noticed. And I've always had this feeling that they went a little bit easier up there than they did down here after the Good Friday Agreement, because all of these things are, of course, orchestrated. And they would have said, this is, of course, a theory. They would have said after the Good Friday Agreement and the Troubles and all that, with so much heat up there, so to speak, with so many active individuals, we'll call them, right? And so many identity-based people up there who are used to fighting for their corner, and such a maelstrom that has just begun to sort of cool down or disarm. You know, let's just put them on slow mode, and let's down south put them on fast mode. And that's the feeling I get when I go up there. Now, I'm sure people living in certain parts of the 6 counties will say, oh no, I'm surrounded by foreigners and that. But I'm telling you, I live down here and I go up there a lot too. And in general, we'll say, in general, it's a different story. You know, if you go from Dundalk in County Louth to Newry in County Down, which is I don't know, it's like a half an hour drive or less, it's different, you know. So I don't know. I don't know about the line between loyalist and Republican or Catholic and Protestant, but definitely the North, so to speak, could be a tough nut to crack in a way. You know, it's an interesting dynamic for sure. Whether it can unite the people up there, I'm not sure. Do you know what? Short answer is potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. I would cheekily say the solution is for the Irish to return to the old ways, the old faiths, and unite in their ancestral faiths, and therefore leave aside the question of Protestant and Catholic. But that is an entirely different stream altogether. German Pointer or LTG, what are your thoughts?
I'll just say that, you know, the people coming in, they won't differentiate between, you know, Irish Catholic nationalist and Unionist Protestant. They're not going to differentiate. They'll just see them as white, and that's it. So you have to perceive yourself also through the eyes of the person who's looking at you.
All right, LTG.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add there. The only thing I have to add is like basically what Gerald said.
All right, fair enough. Okay, lads, we're coming up to almost 2.5 hours, so I won't take up any more of your time. I don't see any other questions or comments. And just want to say too, thanks to Patricia for joining in. She had to duck out early and get back to work over there on the farm. Sounds lovely. And I mean that seriously. I used to work on farms. I used to be a bit of a country boy in a past life. It's so many years ago. So I do actually hope that we can speak about her lifestyle there in Mayo on the farm. So thank you to Patricia for joining the panel. Thank you, German Pointer, Last True Gale, and Gerald Murphy for joining as well. I think we had a fantastic conversation. I think people really enjoyed this. So again, my thanks to you all. And just before we go then, shill yourselves. So German Pointer, where can people find you?
They can find me on Odyssey under the German Pointer and also on BitChute. And thanks for inviting me on. I've enjoyed this discussion. I think everyone involved has made some very interesting points.
All right, fantastic. Last True Gale.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel, which I don't really use. I have a Telegram channel, just type in Last True Gale, and Twitter handle Last True Gale. Yeah, this is great fun, and it's been great being on with just yourself, German Pointer, and Gerard Murphy again, and yourself, Pox, and thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, and Gerard Murphy, the last shill of the night.
Okay, let me think. I'm on Twitter and Telegram as Gerald Murphy. It's Gerald Murphy _ I think on Twitter. You can find me, via the name. on either one, and anything else I do can kind of come from there. But yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks to all the lads for joining in as well. I had a nice chat, and I enjoyed listening to everybody's point of view, and to the audience as well. Cheers.
Okay, great, fantastic. All right, everyone, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back on the video channels with something. I don't know. I usually come back to the Odyssey and the YouTube channel for special occasions like these. And then, of course, you can always find me on Telegram, which is my main stomping ground, where I do, the daily shit posting and hot take wankery. And occasionally on Thursdays, we do a cozy live stream where I usually tell stories. All right. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day or night, wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye.